The chandeliers burned like captured stars above the ballroom, their light spilling over silk, jewels, and carefully practiced smiles. The air smelled of winter roses and polished marble, and beneath the music of the violins there lingered the steady hum of whispered judgments, the kind that floated politely but cut like slender knives. Carriages had drawn up all evening at the entrance to the estate, depositing London's glittering elite, duchesses wrapped in velvet and lace, lords in immaculate coats, young heirs with hair sculpted into fashionable carelessness. All had come to display or observe, to praise or devour, because the season was cruel that year, and gossip was the only warmth society offered. She stood near the far end of the ballroom, where the candlelight softened, and the shadows gathered like gentle company. A young woman of modest gown and quieter presence, she held herself as though she feared to take up too much space. Her dress was well made but plain, a pale shade of blue that flattered but did not boast. She was there not as a guest of honor, nor as a daughter of wealth, but as the companion of Lady Whitcomb, a stiff and formidable widow who believed kindness a frivolity. The young woman's task was simple: to remain near, to assist with shawls and correspondence, and to be seen, but never, under any circumstance, noticed. Yet she had been noticed once, and disastrously so. She held a glass of champagne she did not drink, her fingers trembling despite her efforts. Only a year earlier she had believed herself loved. A young gentleman, warm of smile and earnest in word, had promised her devotion. He had taken her hands beneath a willow tree and sworn that fortune mattered not, that love was nobler than inheritance or dowry. She believed him, and she believed him still for 3 fragile months, until his father summoned him, and the matter was ended with a single sentence: "If you insist upon this attachment, you will destroy us both." She had gone to him then, in a storm of desperation, rain soaking her hair and gown. She had pleaded for explanation, for hope, and yes, she had knelt, not for herself, but for what she thought was love. But kneeling was all society remembered, and they told the story now as though it were a comedy. She kept her gaze low tonight, trying to disappear among crowded elegance. But society is never content to let a wounded thing rest. The room altered, softly at first, then with the force of a sudden hush. People shifted aside like waves parting for a ship. Her former beloved entered the ballroom, offering greetings with a confidence that bespoke his new elevation. On his arm was his fiancée, a lady of excellent fortune, trained in the art of appearing born for admiration. Her gown glittered with beads like frost. Her smile was practiced sweetness, yet her eyes warmed only toward her own reflection in others. They crossed the ballroom with deliberate slowness, ensuring every eye noted their arrival. The heroine saw them approach, felt her pulse stumble, though she did not look up. She wished only to remain unseen, untouched by memory. "Good evening," the gentleman said, his tone too cheerful, the cheer too thin. "What a pleasant surprise to encounter you here." The lady on his arm tilted her head, her voice honeyed. "We were just speaking of you, my dear." "Someone said you are now in service? How admirable." "Truly, humility is its own form of grace." The words were gentle enough to pass for kindness, but the smirk behind them was unmistakable. A few ladies nearby angled themselves closer, eager to witness. The young woman's cheeks flushed. She could not speak, for anything she said would be twisted into ridicule. "Oh, do not be shy," the gentleman continued, as though offering mercy. "There is no need for awkwardness between us. We must not let the past be a burden. All is well forgotten now, is it not?" Forgotten. He said it so easily, as though her heart were something that could be misplaced like a glove. Laughter stirred, polite, hidden behind fans and gloved fingers. A whisper slid through the crowd like silk drawn across glass. "Do you recall?" She knelt in the mud for him, begging. The music did not falter, but the floor seemed to tilt beneath her. Her vision blurred around the edges as humiliation rose bitter in her throat. She could not breathe. Even silence felt too loud. And then a presence entered the space, not sudden, not dramatic, but powerful in the way a tide shifts. A man, tall, composed, his coat of deep charcoal, and his gloves black as midnight, had been observing from across the ballroom. He was known to all, a duke of considerable wealth, lineage old as stone, yet his expression was cold and quiet enough to discourage casual approach. He rarely danced. He rarely smiled. He rarely indulged the trivialities of society. That he was even present was remarkable enough. His gaze, gray as a winter morning before snow, rested upon the young woman. He had seen everything. The humiliation, the tremor in her hands, the cruel delight of spectators. No one expected him to move, but he did. He stepped forward, each motion deliberate, and the crowd parted before him as if compelled. The ex-lover faltered, uncertain. The young woman, overwhelmed and desperate to salvage a shred of dignity, lifted her eyes and found the Duke before her. Her voice, when it came, was scarcely more than breath. "My lord, act as though you love me. Please, just for this moment." Not a command, not a deception, a plea born of heartbreak raw and trembling. The room froze. Even the violins faltered. The Duke did not speak at once, and that silence stretched like tension on drawn thread. His eyes searched her face, not with surprise, but with something unreadable and solemn. Then, without flourish or hesitation, he extended his gloved hand. "If that is your wish," he said. His voice low, controlled, almost tender. "Then let us begin with a dance." Gasps fluttered through the ballroom like startled birds. The ex-lover's composure fractured. The fiancé's pleasant smile turned brittle. The gossiping crowd leaned forward, as though witnessing the opening act of a scandal destined to echo for months. The young woman placed her hand in his. The violins resumed, and the chandeliers burned brighter, as if the stars themselves had chosen to bear witness. The dance had ended, yet its consequences unfurled long after the violins fell silent. When the Duke led her from the floor, every eye lingered, hungry for interpretation. The ballroom seemed to pulse around them, whispers, startled glances, the quick, furtive tilt of fans. The young woman felt the weight of a world turning its full attention upon her, though the Duke remained composed, his manner unchanged, as though offering his hand to a companion of equal regard were the most natural affair in the evening. He did not speak until they stood near the great window overlooking the winter garden. Snow fell softly beyond, veiling the grounds in moon-pale serenity. "If you wish," he said, his voice quiet, "I shall escort you to your carriage when Lady Whitcomb is ready to depart. You need not endure more of this evening than you choose." She lowered her gaze, her breath unsteady. "I have already taken too much of your notice, my lord." "I did not mean—" He lifted one gloved hand, not touching her, yet the gesture alone bid her pause. "You asked," he reminded her gently, "and I answered, no lecture, no rebuke, only acknowledgment." It was more mercy than she had been shown in many months, and yet, when the night concluded and the carriages rolled away, society was already preparing its judgment. By morning, every drawing-room, tea-table, and milliner's shop in London buzzed with the story. The reserved Duke, whose distance from romantic entanglements was almost mythic, had danced with the disgraced girl. Not simply danced, but done so with attentiveness, a patience unusual for a man known to suffer social gatherings only out of inherited duty. No one agreed on what it meant. Everyone agreed it meant something. The young woman was made aware of this long before she left her room the next day. Lady Whitcomb's maid knocked sharply, breathless with scandalous tidings. "Miss, you must see the morning papers." And though no paper printed the story outright, half a dozen small paragraphs hinted at it. Veiled beneath suggestive phrasing, a notable figure of the peerage was seen in quite unexpected company at the winter assembly. Rumor suggests an unusual attentiveness displayed where there had previously been no inclination. But it was not print that cut the deepest. It was the calls. 2 ladies of excellent breeding came to visit Lady Whitcomb before noon. Their purpose was wrapped in courtesy, but their true intent transparent as glass. They came to study the girl as one studies an insect pinned beneath a needle. Their remarks smiled, but their eyes gleamed with triumph at finding the subject of fresh gossip standing just before them. "So charming that the Duke should take notice," one murmured as she sipped her tea. though I dare say his regard is seasonal, passing. One ought not to think too sentimentally of it. And how gracefully you bear the attention," the other added, her tone like a velvet drape concealing a dagger. "One might almost believe you accustomed to admiration of such caliber." The young woman answered only with quiet poise. She had learned, in her grief, that the cruel desired reaction. Denying them one was the only weapon she possessed. But the real astonishment came that evening. A footman presented a small parcel, no larger than a book, wrapped in pale cream paper and tied with a thin silver ribbon. It bore no ostentatious crest, no accompanying flourish, only her name, written in an elegant but restrained hand. Her breath caught. She opened it slowly, careful not to tear what felt undeservedly delicate. Inside lay a single winter rose, its petals preserved in a clear glass case, frost-white, yet luminous as though holding moonlight within, and beneath it, a card. Not all fragile things are without strength. Her heart ached, not because it was extravagant, but because it was not. It was a gift of observation, of understanding, of seeing her, but gifts in society are never received in silence. 2 days later, she found herself invited to a luncheon hosted by the Marchioness of Hawford, a lady who had never, in all her life, extended invitation to someone of such inferior circumstance. Lady Whitcomb accepted on her behalf, eager to preen in the borrowed glow of attention. And so she went, wearing her best dress, though she felt as though she were stepping into a lion's den. The luncheon was held in a conservatory filled with exotic flowers. The air was thick with perfume, laughter bright and brittle. She had scarcely seated herself when the first remark came, a seemingly idle comment about roses. "I have always found preserved flowers so curious," said the Marchioness, stirring sugar into her tea. "They attempt to hold beauty past its natural time. A rather desperate gesture, would you say?" The room exhaled a soft ripple of delighted cruelty. She felt it, a tightening in her ribs. But she did not break. She had already broken once and learned the shape of the pieces she had become. She lifted her gaze and answered with a calm steadiness. "On the contrary, my lady, I believe the preservation of something delicate is an act of reverence. It honors the fact that beauty is fleeting and thus precious." Her poise only sharpened their amusement. "Charming," someone murmured. "One would think her a poet." "She is something," another replied, too softly for polite ears, but not for hers. And then the doors opened. The Duke entered with the same composed gravity he carried like a mantle. Conversation stuttered. No one had expected him. Certainly not here. Certainly not now. He crossed the room without greeting anyone first. He stopped at her side, and simply by standing there, he redefined her place in the room. "Miss," he said softly, inclining his head toward her, "I had hoped you would allow me the honor of escorting you home when the luncheon concludes." A silence fell sharp enough to fracture the air. The Marchioness attempted a smile. "Your Grace, we are so delighted." He did not spare her a glance. The room understood. She was not a passing whim. She was under his protection. It was the beginning of war, polite, elegant, and vicious, and her former beloved felt its sting most of all. He cornered her later in a quiet corridor lined with portraits. "Do not think," he hissed, no courtesy now, "that proximity to him will elevate you. You are being used, displayed, just as you once tried to use me." She looked at him then, not with longing, but with a clarity that surprised even her. "I begged you," she said softly, "not to love me, but to stand with me. And even that you found too costly." For once he had no answer. That night, as her carriage rolled home, she watched snowfall gather on empty streets. She did not know what the Duke intended, not truly. But for the first time in many months, dignity did not feel like something she was fighting to reclaim. It felt like something she had never lost, and the world, sensing its shifting, sharpened its claws and prepared to strike. Snow fell in soft, unhurried flakes against the carriage window, blurring the lamps outside into hazy halos of gold. The city had quieted to its winter hush, streets muffled in white, chimneys exhaling smoke that vanished into pale sky. She sat across from the Duke, hands folded to still their trembling. They had not spoken since leaving the luncheon. Silence stretched between them, not cold, but thick with unasked questions. When the carriage stopped before his townhouse rather than Lady Whitcomb's, she startled. He regarded her calmly. "I intend no impropriety," he said. "But there are matters I believe should not wait for another day. You may refuse, and I shall see you safely home at once." His voice carried no pressure, no command. Still, she sensed turning back would mean returning to a life lived in shadows, enduring whispers, enduring doubt, always retreating. She stepped down. The Duke's townhouse was elegant but not ostentatious. Firelight glowed warm within, rather than bright. The staff bowed discreetly and vanished, leaving the two alone. They entered a small study lined with dark shelves, the air scented of old paper and cedar. A single fire burned in the hearth, its light painting the room in amber. He gestured for her to sit near the fire, and for a moment neither spoke. Flames crackled softly. Snow whispered against glass. Finally he said, "I did not expect to dance that night." She let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh, though weary. "Nor did I expect to ask." His gaze settled on her hands, folded tightly in her lap. "You were desperate," he said gently, "and desperation is not something one chooses. It is something one is driven into." Her throat tightened. "You saw it then." "I have seen it before," he answered, and though his tone remained composed, something heavy flickered beneath. "I have seen what this society does to those who do not meet its narrow conditions for worth." She looked up. His expression, so often unreadable, held an unfamiliar softness. He leaned back in his chair, the shadows outlining the strong planes of his face. "Years ago I was engaged, not through arrangement, but by affection. She was not of noble birth, but she was kind. Steady in her convictions, there was a pause. Not hesitation, remembrance. My family tolerated it. Hers rejoiced. But the ton—" He exhaled slowly. The whispers began. That she was grasping, that I was being manipulated, that I lacked judgment. Invitations ceased. Doors closed. She endured it with grace, but I— His jaw tightened. I believed I could protect her. I was wrong. She did not speak, sensing the weight of what came next. One evening, he continued quietly, she returned a ring to me, placed it in my hand, and said she wished to free me from the ridicule that had become her burden. She told me she loved me, but love should not require one to be scourged. He looked into the fire. She left England soon after. I do not know where she went. The silence that followed was profound, not empty, but shared. She felt her heart tremble, not with pity but recognition. "You did not lose her for lack of feeling," she whispered. "You lost her for caring too much." The Duke's eyes lifted to hers, something unguarded passing between them. No further explanation was needed. She drew a breath, gathering courage like fragile lace. "When my former betrothed cast me aside, I believed it was the end of what future I had imagined. But the true humiliation was what followed. To be pitied would have been bearable. To be mocked was cruelty." She swallowed, and her voice steadied. "I had thought my affection was shared. Instead, it proved nothing more than a childhood adornment he was free to discard once something shinier was offered." The Duke's expression hardened, not with anger at her, but at the world that had made such pain commonplace. "Then you did not beg for him," he said quietly. "You begged to be spared disgrace." Her gaze glistened, though she did not cry. She was past tears. "I begged to keep some part of myself, but it was lost that night until—" She faltered, her breath catching. "Until you offered me your hand." "You did not know me, yet you saw me." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, voice lowered. "I offered my hand because you stood in a room of wolves and did not bow your head." "Not even then." She stared at him, stunned. "I felt I was breaking." "That is what courage often feels like," he murmured. The fire crackled. Snow drifted outside. Time seemed to slow. A warmth unfurled between them, not sudden nor dramatic, but quiet and deep, like roots finding soil. His gloved hand rested on the arm of his chair. Hesitant, she reached out, not to take it, but to let her fingers touch the back of his glove. A gesture soft, uncertain, reverent. He did not pull away. His breath stilled. For a moment the world existed only in the space between two hands, but the world does not permit peace for long. The next afternoon, the first poisoned rumor spread. It came from the lips of his former fiancée's cousin, the young lady of fortune now engaged to the man who once claimed devotion to the heroine. They whispered that the girl sought to ensnare the Duke, that her tears had been calculated, her plea a scandalous gambit to climb above her station. They spoke of manipulation, of cunning sweetness hiding ambition. And though no one dared say it publicly, the implication took hold. She was hunting him. Invitations vanished. Doors closed. Market vendors stared. Even passers-by paused to whisper when she walked by. When she next saw the Duke, the tension in the air carried the weight of a storm. "I have heard what they are saying," he said. "And I will not allow them to continue." She shook her head quickly. "You have already done too much. If you defend me further, they will only double their malice. They will call it infatuation, foolishness." "Let them," he answered, voice firm, steady, immovable. "If they believe our connection a matter of imagination, then we must show them that it is real enough to withstand their scrutiny." Her breath caught. "And if it is not?" His eyes met hers, clear, unwavering. "Then we shall discover that truth together." The firelight flickered between them. Warm and steady, the world outside sharpened its claws. But in that moment she no longer feared it. The ballroom stood like a stage prepared for judgment, every polished marble tile reflecting expectations sharpened over weeks of whispers. The Winter Charity Gala was the pinnacle of the season, where alliances were displayed like jeweled swords and reputations were either burnished or quietly destroyed. It was here the Duke chose to bring her, not as a companion, not as an object of rumor, but as the woman who walked beside him. Her gloved hand rested lightly upon his arm as they entered. Conversation stilled. Fans faltered mid-flutter. The orchestra did not stop, but it lost its confidence for several breaths before regaining rhythm. She felt the weight of countless eyes, and her spine straightened, as though the very pressure sculpted her posture. The Duke walked with steady, unhurried grace. Not defiance, certainty. He led her directly into the heart of the room, pausing exactly where the chandeliers cast the brightest light. The message required no words. She belonged beside him. Her former beloved stood near the refreshments table, his fiancée gleaming beside him in a gown of pale gold. Their expressions froze, his tinged with shock, hers with a satisfaction sharpened into cruelty. "So it is true," the fiancée murmured, her voice lilting just enough to carry to nearby ears. "Our little charity case has found herself a patron." The Duke turned his head, his gaze resting on the lady with a detachment so cold it burned. "I'm curious," he said, voice smooth as polished steel. "Do you speak always with such elegance, or only when attempting to wound someone who has shown you no offense?" The lady flushed crimson. Her fiancé stepped forward, jaw set. "Your Grace, I must caution you. Appearances matter. A man of your stature ought to—" "Ought to?" the Duke repeated, one brow lifting. "You speak as though you hold authority over my choices." The young man swallowed. The room moved closer without stepping forward, drawn by gravity stronger than propriety. The heroine's heartbeat thundered. She had expected scrutiny, but not confrontation. She opened her mouth, perhaps to soothe, perhaps to apologize for the spectacle, but the Duke gently placed his hand over hers. "Walk with me," he murmured. He led her to the center of the floor just as the next waltz began. No announcement was made, yet the crowd parted, as if compelled by instinct. The dance began. His hand at her back was steady, grounding. She followed his lead, her movements born not of practice but trust. The music swelled around them, a current carrying them through a sea of watching eyes. "You must know," she whispered, breath trembling but controlled, "that by doing this, you invite their hatred." He looked down at her, and in his eyes she saw both quiet sorrow and a fierce, deliberate tenderness. "I have lived my life beneath the expectations of others," he said. "Cold, silent, contained. I once believed restraint to be virtue, but I have learned that silence can be its own form of cowardice." Her breath hitched. "I will not be silent now." The waltz drew to its final turn. The Duke brought her to stillness, holding her in the last suspended note. The world exhaled, and then her former beloved stepped forward. "This spectacle has gone far enough," he said sharply. "You are being deceived, my lord. She is not what she seems." The orchestra fell quiet. A silence more complete than the dance had been filled the air. The young woman felt the room tilt again. Memories of mud, of pleading, of humiliation clawed at her. But before she could speak, the Duke's voice rang out, clear and unyielding. "Then let us be clear," he said. "What do you believe she is?" A cruel hesitation. A calculated moment of superiority. "A woman who uses affection as leverage," the man replied. "First against me, now against you." A single breath passed. The crowd waited for the break, for the shattering. Instead, the Duke stepped closer to her, turning his body fully toward hers. He did not look at the crowd. He looked only at her. "I do not pretend to love her," he said softly. And then louder, enough for the ballroom walls to bear witness, "I do love her." The words struck like a bell, resonating through marble and silk and bone. Her former beloved staggered back. The fiancé's eyes widened, her poise shrinking to ashes. The crowd erupted, not in cheers but in shocked whispers, scandal carried like wildfire in a dry field. The heroine stood frozen. Not with disbelief, she had known there was something growing between them, but with the overwhelming realization of being seen. Truly seen, not as charity, not as rumor, as herself. Her throat tightened. She could not speak, not yet. The Duke lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her glove. A gesture both intimate and public, both vow and challenge. Let them talk, let them recoil, let them burn. He would not be moved. But even as warmth bloomed in her chest, fear coiled beneath it. Love spoken aloud was no mere sentiment. It was a declaration of war against the world that had once crushed her, and though she stood beside him, her heart faltered with a single aching question. Did he speak from truth, or from resolve to protect her? The music returned. The night glittered onward, but something fragile and irreplaceable hung trembling between them, something that could either shatter or bloom. The ballroom applause did not follow. Instead there came a hush, heavy, breathless, uncertain. The Duke's declaration still trembled in the air, a note not yet resolved. She stood at the center of the grand room, surrounded by chandeliers and mirrored walls, yet she felt strangely alone, as though the world had narrowed to the space behind her ribs. He loved her. He had said it, spoken it before society, before those who sought to shame her, a gesture so grand it could have lifted her to heaven. Yet doubt seeped through her like winter cold. Love spoken under watchful eyes, was it truth or defense? Gratitude, duty? A shield in her name rather than his heart's desire. Her breath faltered. The room blurred. Before the Duke could take her arm again, she stepped back, her voice barely more than air. "I need to breathe." She did not wait for permission. She turned and slipped through the crowd, hearing whispers part behind her, like water disturbed by an oar. Outside, the winter night bit sharply at her skin. Lanterns glowed faintly along the garden path, casting golden arcs across the snow. She walked without direction, only seeking quiet. The cold numbed her fingers, but it steadied her thoughts. The Duke's declaration had shattered the equilibrium of the room, but what now? She stopped beneath a bare winter tree, branches etched like ink strokes against the moonlight. Her breath clouded before her. She pressed her hands to her chest, as though to keep her heart from breaking open. She had spent so long building quiet strength, holding together the remnants of dignity after humiliation. She feared hope most of all. Hope was fragile. Hope was dangerous. And love, if she allowed herself to believe in it, could undo her entirely. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind her. She did not need to turn to know it was him. He halted a respectful distance away. "I will not ask forgiveness for speaking the truth," he said softly. She closed her eyes. "You spoke it before all of them." "Yes," he answered. "Because it is not a truth that shrinks from the world. It is not shameful. It does not belong in whispers." She trembled, not from cold. "But did you speak it for me or for yourself? Did you speak it because you felt it, or because you wished to shield me from cruelty?" The Duke was silent for a moment, the kind of silence where a heart chooses its words. I have lived much of my life in restraint, he said. I believed that control was the only protection against disappointment, against loss, against vulnerability. And so I built walls, high ones, strong ones. I let no one touch what was real within me. His voice lowered, gentle, unguarded. Not even her, the woman I could not keep. She turned slightly enough to see him, snow collecting on his shoulders like fine ash. His face was bare of pretense, carved not from stone but from a quiet, wounded truth. When I saw you at the ball that night, he continued, standing in the center of cruelty you did not deserve, I recognized myself. Not the composed gentleman I present to the world, but the man who once reached for love and lost it. His gaze softened. You were breaking. And you did not hide it. You did not cloak your pain in polite detachment. You asked, plainly, desperately, honestly. His breath misted in the cold. And I realized I envied your courage. Her eyes stung, though no tears yet fell. You believe I offered my hand out of kindness? He asked quietly. No, it was admiration and recognition. And yes, love. Not sudden, not born in a moment, but revealed by one. She swallowed, the night spinning gently around her. And yet, I fear I am unworthy of such devotion. I fear I am still the girl who knelt in the mud, begging to be chosen. He stepped closer, not touching, but near enough that his warmth reached her. Then allow me to give you what was denied you. Not elevation, not rescue, but choice. Her breath caught. Choice, a word that felt like freedom. I love you, he said, steady as the falling snow. But I do not ask you to love me because I have declared it. I ask you to decide, without society's eyes upon you, whether your heart wishes mine. The world fell silent, truly silent. No wind, no music, no footsteps. Only the hush of falling snow and the faint echo of her heartbeat. She realized then that love was not the act of kneeling nor the act of saving. It was the courage to stand, even when trembling. She turned to him fully, and the depth of his gaze struck her like warmth after frost. You saw me when others averted their eyes, she whispered. You spoke for me when I could not find my voice. And you ask now that I choose freely. Her chest rose, breath uneven. Then hear my truth. I do not love you because you protected me. I love you because when I was most broken, you did not try to fix me. You simply stood beside me. His expression changed, softened, eased, brightened from within. She reached for his hand, ungloved now, skin to skin. Yes, she breathed. My heart chooses yours, the Duke exhaled, not relief, but something deeper, release, fulfillment. He lifted her hand to his lips, not to claim, but to honor. Snow continued to fall, covering footprints behind them, marking instead the path ahead, not the girl who begged, not the man who remained silent. Two souls, choosing freely, equally, fiercely. The night held its breath, then let it go, as love bloomed warm against the winter cold.